By the end of this lesson, we will be able to create a box plot by finding something called the 5-number summary. We're going to use the median and other statistical values to get this 5-number summary. A box plot is a graph that provides a picture of the data that's ordered, meaning in increasing order, and divided into 4 intervals that each contain 25% of the data. Another name for a box plot is a box and whisker plot. This name will make more sense after you see the picture. So a box plot displays the data distribution. Distribution describes a spread. Is the data really spread out or is it very close together? And it's all based on these 5 special numbers that make the 5-number summary. The first important value of a data set is the smallest number. This number is called the minimum. So the minimum value of the set of data after it's listed in order is always our first value in our 5-number summary. Now, the next one is a little more complicated. It says find the median, or the middle, of the first half. So the middle of the first half of the data. We call this the lower quartile. So if I have a list of values, it's not the center value, it's the center of the first half. So we call it quartile 1. It's 1/4 of the way through the data. A shorthand notation, which we will use often, is Q1. This represents quartile 1. Next up is the very middle of the data. The middle value of the entire data set, is the median. Now the median has another name as well. We can refer to it as MED. In our calculator, we'll see that later this unit. But Q2, meaning second quartile, is also the median. This should make sense. The second quarter of the year is halfway through the year. At the end of the second quarter, that would be the median of the school year. Next up is the median of the second half. So now the middle of the second half. So if you think about a school year again, this would be the third quarter, or quartile 3. So we will use Q3 as a shorthand notation to represent the quartile 3. This is called our upper quartile. Now, the difference between the upper and lower is that the lower comes from the smaller values in the set, and the upper quartile comes from the higher values in the set. And then last, in our 5-number summary, is the highest number in the entire set, which is called our maximum. Here we see a further explanation of each piece. A 5-number summary is used to create the box and whisker plot. It says each vertical line of the box and whisker plot represents a value from the summary. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 little vertical lines that are floating above the scale. These represent our 5-number summary. Our minimum, quartile 1, our median, quartile 3, and our maximum. This data set seems to be spread from this value all the way to this maximum value. And then 1/4 of the data is here. It's broken apart by 25% in each section, meaning I have 25% of the data in this section. Another 25% of the data would be in this section. 25% of the list would be here. And the final 25% is here. 25%. Now, the name box and whisker plot comes from these 2 lines here. They stretch out from the box. So box, and then these are known as the whiskers, from the edge of the box extending out, from the edge of the box extending out. Okay, let's construct a box plot for each of these examples. Here we see a list of pre-algebra assessment test scores for an algebra class of 15 students. So now they are already listed in increasing order. There's test scores of a 20, and they range all the way through to a 70. So now we want to find our 5-number summary. So the first thing we should write on our paper is the 5-number summary is our min, our Q1, our median, Q3, and our maximum. But now we need to find it from this list. The minimum is easy to identify. It is 20. This would be our minimum. Okay, now our maximum is pretty easy to find too. It's already in order. This would be my maximum value. So I'm going to label that as 70. Okay, now for the rest, we have to go a little bit out of order. It's easiest to find the median next, which is the one that should be familiar to you from last year. To find the median, we have to cross out each value on either end until we reach the middle. Now notice I use a backslash going in one direction and a forward slash in the other. It helps me not lose track of how many I've done on each side. Here I see I've gone 3 and then 3. So now a fourth with a fourth, a fifth with a fifth, a sixth one crossed out with a sixth one, seventh and seventh. So now I know 30 is directly in the middle. So this would be called my median value. So my median is 30. Quartile 1 is found by identifying the middle of the first half of data. So now if I separate the data, this would be the first half. This is directly in the middle and not included. And then this list would be the second half of the data. So to find quartile 1, I need to find the middle of this yellow set. So now, since these are all back, I go like this. I go forwards. Now I can keep track again. 1 and 1, 2 and 2, 3 and 3. I find that quartile 1 is 26. So it's 26. Now let's identify quartile 3. Quartile 3 has to be in the middle of the upper half. This would be the upper half of the data, the higher half of numbers. 1 and 1, 2 and 2, 3 and 3. The middle of the upper half is 35. So Q3 is 35. Now before we construct the box plot, I want you to notice that there is a dot plot down here. This dot plot actually has a dot plotted for every single one of these 15 values. So we could see that one person scored a 20, one person a 25, 2 a 26, 4 scored a 30, and so on. Okay, so now this is a dot plot because it's comprised of dots. The box and whisker plot should look something like this graph here. So we need to plot our 5-number summary. I like to guide myself by plotting points at the beginning. So if I plot my minimum, my 20, I don't want to plot it on the line. If you look back at this example, this whole graph is floating above the scale. So I want to plot a point floating above the 20, but lined up with it. Okay, now that's my first guideline. Now 26. Well, if this is 20 and this is 30, this must be 25. So I have to go a little bit to the right of it and plot a point to represent 26. I estimate as best as I can. The median will go right above 30, floating up high. And then 35 will go between the 30 and the 40. And then the maximum will go above the 70. Okay, now here's the tricky part. To draw the box and whisker plot, the first thing I like to do is I make a box around these 3 middle values. The box represents half of the data. Most of the data is in this box. So I draw a box around these 3, and I draw a line down the middle for the median. I go through the green point. This green point might not necessarily always be directly in the center, but now I have my box. I have to extend my whisker for the upper piece to show the maximum, and extend this whisker for the minimum. We have just completed our first box plot. Something worth noticing is a lot of the data is over here. And if I look above, 50% of the data is in here. Because as we mentioned in our notes, this is breaking apart our data by 25% here, 25% there, 25% here. And then 25% of the data stretches pretty far. And that's because look here. from 35 to 70, there's a huge jump. Meanwhile, the other three quarters, 30 to 35, 26 to 30, and 20 to 26, they're rather small, those gaps. This gap, the last 25% of the data, ranges pretty far. Okay, let's try one more together. The average time in hours of 12 students that they spent sleeping each night. So we collected data from 12 different students and found that the minimum amount of sleep from this group of students was 5 hours each night. The maximum amount of sleep from this set of students was 9 hours each night. So we have 9 for our max. All right, so we need our 5-number summary listed on our paper. To find the median next, I want to cross out the lowest with the highest. The lowest with the highest. Our goal is to find who's directly in the middle. Lowest with the highest. Lowest with the highest. Lowest with the highest. Now, I have 2 values left in the middle. I am always supposed to average these 2 values. I'm supposed to find the average, meaning add them up and divide by 2. This will tell me what's directly in between them. But because these numbers are identical, if I add 6.5 and 6.5, I'll get 13, and when I divide by 2, I get 6.5. So that means my median is 6.5. It would be directly in the middle of the data set. So now that this is my median, okay, these values are still part of my lower and upper half. When I go to collect my lower values, my lower half, I include this value this time. And then my upper half, this value is included as well, because this 6.5 represents what's directly in between them technically. So this 6.5 is here. Okay, now let's find quartile 1. To find quartile 1, we need to cross out the lowest and the highest of the upper half. Lower half rather. Lowest and the highest. And then again, I end up with a double value. If I add 6 and 6 and divide by 2 to find the average, I end up with 12 over 2, so Q1 is 6. Works out nicely when the numbers that double up match. But now, it's not as easy. Let's look at the next piece. To find quartile 3, I need the lower and the highest from the upper half. Lower and highest. This time I find 7 and 8 are in the middle. So I have to average these together to find out what's directly in between them. 7 plus 8 divided by 2. If I add 7 and 8, I get 15. If I cut it in half, I realize it's 7.5, which we could have done in mental math. The only number that's perfectly between 7 and 8 is 7.5. So this is quartile 3, 7.5. Okay, this time the dots, they appear a little different, but it's still considered a dot plot. They're showing each of the values of the 12 students that they gave. We should always label it if it's not labeled. So this describes the hours of sleep each night. Okay, now we have to mimic this scale above so that we can draw a box plot. So I'm going to say 6 is about here. I'm lining them up as best as I can. 7. This is 8, and this would be 9 hours. Now for the box plot, I do not have to plot all 12 values. I only need my 5-number summary again. So my 5-number summary begins with the minimum value at 5. So remember, plot it so it's floating above and not on the scale. The 6 will be plotted floating above here. I have to estimate 6.5 would be directly in between, so about here. 7.5 would be directly in between, so about here. And the 9 hours, someone who had 9 hours of sleep would go here. Here's my 5-number summary. To draw the box plot, I like to start with the box in the center around the middle value. This middle value tells me where to slice the box, and then I draw both whiskers. We have just completed 2 box plots. This data set appears a little bit different. Again, remember, 25% of the data is here, and then another 25% here, another 25% here, and then the last 25% of it is here. I'd like you to try this problem. Remember, you have the number of hours for 12 students that they spend exercising each week. Find your 5-number summary, record it, copy your scale, and create your box plot. Now would be a good time to pause your video, try it on your own, and then press play to check. Please check your answer and come to class prepared with any questions you may have. Tomorrow we will practice creating some more and focus more on interpreting the details that we can read from each graph. Thank you for watching.